Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Idiots on the Airwave podcast. I am, of course, Idiots, and Daniel is on the Airwaves, which is a liminal space. A little known fact: radio waves are real. I don't know why I said they're real, as if people don't think they're real. I meant they're solid objects, and they're all liminal spaces. And that's my theory for the day.
Okay then. Hot take.
Okay. But for real, I'm gonna remove my pop filter real quick because I forgot that was there. Oh.
It's right in front of his face.
Anyways, we're not gonna worry about that. Today we're going to talk about some horror, some scary stuff.
Yeah.
We're gonna be some spooky boys just in time for Halloween. It's only a month away. It's never too early to start. I almost said too late to start, but I think that's the opposite of what's going on here.
Yeah.
But yeah, what specific liminal space do you want to start off with?
Well, liminal. I guess, being me, I suppose definition of liminal space out. Because I hear people describe it a certain way, and there's a different like textbook definition or something. And then there's like a more colloquial sense of people defining it. I've always heard it as spaces that feel like they should be inhabited by people, or like places that you regularly would expect people to inhabit that aren't inhabited, like a closed mall, like a place typically bustling with people and nobody's there, and it's just kind of left to, whatever goes on inside the mall whenever it's empty. It's kind of scary because you're so used to seeing people there. That's kind of an idea of liminal space, is how it's been described to me.
I agree with that for the most part. I have not like how on not Wikipedia but Google, it will put like one definition, the second one. I personally prefer to use the definition. Well, it's not really a definition so much as is gist, where it's basically like a liminal space is a space that feels just kind of off. It kind of takes on an Uncanny Valley identity, but for spaces. I just like that more because it also kind of plays into like urban exploration in places that are destroyed. It's just a different definition that it's more like, the best way I've heard it described is it's an AI generated image. You can tell what it's supposed to be, but it's subtly off and it makes it not fun. That's another definition that I do like.
Yeah, I would go with that definition as well. I've heard both of them, and both of them have been applied, and they both give off the same effect for me. So, I go with either one depending on whatever the situation is or who I'm talking to, typically, because the other people only go with one. I can find both to be pretty a fair assessment.
Yeah, I think they're more subcategories of each other than really different things. I think when it comes to things like this, the definitions just get blurred.
Yeah. I guess examples of liminal spaces in, I don't know, it's hard to find like examples of it in real life because part of some of the definitions people use are things that aren't entirely like possible. It's hard to find examples in real life other than just like minorly unsettling stuff like a closed mall, because some of the definitions of this like Uncanny Valley type stuff is kind of implies or conveys stuff that isn't entirely possible in real life, I think. I mean, it's a big discussion about how there's a level in Super Mario 64 that gives off the feeling of liminal space very well. And if you really want to think about it like that, the entire game, really. But like there's a specific level where you go down into like this underwater city where there are like houses around that you can't enter, and it like people always got left wondering like why is the backdrop colored so melancholy? Why is the lighting weird? Why is the music the way it is? Because it feels kind of odd and slightly disturbing if you think about it a little too much, I guess. Um, so it's hard to find like something that's like deeply unsettling in real life, I would say. But I mean, it can get deeply
Yeah.
unsettling, but not right off the bat. That's far more easily available, I think, in I don't know, video games or creepy pastas or not creepy pasta. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just
I think the older games in general are very, very good at kind of that liminal space thing. Old games in general are kind of just very good at being unintentionally scary. Like, if anyone's familiar with, like, Lavender Town from the first Pokemon game, it's not supposed to be as scary as many people found it, but it just ended up being like that. Just, just cause they didn't
yeah.
they didn't fully think it out, or they weren't like children playing the game.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I've heard of this example before. Yeah. Towns enjoy like empty towns scare me. It's like I guess kind of relating to a ghost town, except it doesn't have the run down feel. Like it's still
Yeah,
in good enough repair to where you think that people should still be living there because of the condition it's in, and yet at the same time there is something else that conveys that it's been abandoned for a very long time.
yeah. So now that we've talked a bit about them, would you like to move on to our main discussion topic of the Backrooms?
Yes, yes. The Backrooms, one of the better examples of this decade, or really ever, of liminal space, I think. And overall, like the Backrooms is an example of like a very good execution of many different kinds of unsettling things, like liminal space and the feeling that you're being watched, or like this existential dread and loneliness kind of deal. Um, and it's like it's kind of it was kind of it was, I mean, everybody knows now about the original 4chan post that kind of started it all, that whole office building that people now know as like level 0 or something. The Backrooms is very entertaining in that sense, because there's a lot of levels that people have like written up about, and like the SCP-esque type of I guess collaborative efforts by the community to create this massively expansive world that no one really inhabits other than like um, I don't know, NPCs. I suppose it's like, because you always hear about if you go on like the wiki dot and you hear about like the wanderers and the bases that people set up, it always is referred to in that tone of like third person, in that laid back kind of sense, like they're like a minor piece, or just another what's the term in writing for characters like that, kind of like background characters, but even more minor than that, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And like, and I know there's like a lot of levels and stuff, and they all have their own varying degrees of liminality and stuff, but it all ties back to the same deal of it just being very unsettling, I guess. But AK wanted to talk more about the Kane Pixels stuff, so maybe I'll let him introduce that.
Before I introduce that, I'm gonna go on my anti
Out.
SCP-esque Backrooms rant. First of all, I just want to say that it's not like awful that people have done this to Backroom. I really don't mind it. I'm just gonna express my own personal feelings on why I feel like making the multiple levels and all these characters kind of defeats what I find scary about the Backrooms. Because I think the main thing about the Backrooms is it's a very simple concept. Is that it's not scary in the sense that there's necessarily all these creatures wandering around and you have to try and escape. In fact, I think the very idea that there's a way out in one way or another even if it's just to another level, kind of already to me kind of defeats the horror of it. It's just something about being stuck in this area, in this liminal space with no way out, that I think's really scary about it. I don't know. There's just something about like adding in all this extra lore in a way that kind of makes me feel like it gets too clogged up and kind of misses the core feeling of it. It's kind of the way I feel about especially games like Five Nights at Freddy's, that I think just gets less and less scary as you add more and more onto it, because you're kind of have to move away from the original concept in a way. But that original concept is what makes it scary, and sometimes it just doesn't translate well as you move out. So, if that makes any sense, I just think that the Backrooms by Kane Pixels is a much better canon, because it's much less about like all these levels and all these creatures, and just more about the terror of the Backrooms themselves. And don't get me wrong, there are, like creatures and other canons inside of Kane Pixels series, but I think it keeps it more, in a way, simplified and condensed to make it just work better, in my opinion. So, Kane Pixels, he's an amazing animator. And
He's our age.
yeah, you might recognize him from the Backrooms found footage that I'm fairly sure YouTube decided to put on everybody's recommended at like the same instant, because they were like, mine as
One, because
well.
the guy's like the same age as us, and it's amazing that he's able to do it. Like he's super skilled and like really popular at this point, and it's really great. His canon is definitely easier to follow. Like there is a story, and in the one interview he did give, I believe he alluded that there is an actual story to it that has yet to be fleshed out, because he's telling the story much differently. I I love it because it's a different me. It keeps the idea that that you can no clip out of reality into the back rooms, but at the same time they figured out how to actually get in there through what do they call it, the Logan system, and it's a very compelling story, and it gives the back rooms itself its own character, I guess, to me, because it's not it's it's still something that everybody approaches with extreme caution and can't really figure out. There was a video, the pitfalls, which was in reference to a certain portion of level 0, I believe, where there's holes in the ground, and and they lead into other levels. And that video is probably my favorite video of the series, because it captures just how strange it all really kind of becomes. Like you have this creature that's calling in like this human voice that once you approach it, like you figure out it's not human, and then you see all these oddities, like these scorched walls, or the inverted turn signs too. Like it's all stuff that's just kind of odd by itself, but in the context of everything else, just genuinely terrifying. And it's still, I suppose it would still keep to that original concept, like you put it. But in a sense, it's kind of created its own original concept. Really, the Kane Pixels series has kind of created its own original concept, because there's a way of getting in and out. Whereas in the regular, or like the original canon, I guess, there's not entirely a way to get out at all once you get in. So it's just a matter of traversing through the levels, because the chances of getting back into reality are like, I don't know, 1,000,000,000 to 1. Even then, though, like there was that portion of the video, the original found footage video, the guy does clip back into reality after he gets pushed down the pitfall by the creature, but then he clips in the sky and like 300 feet above the ground. So I don't know. It's a great series.
Yeah, I agree. One of the cool things that I really like about it, I don't know if this is like purposeful or something. But I always found the way that things learn in a non-human way really interesting, whether it be animals or AI. And what this really feels like to me, the entire like Backrooms concept that he's kind of put in, it kind of feels like an AI attempting to replicate what, humans have created, but just failing to understand the individual aspects of it. It's kind of like whenever you give an AI something to write, it's like it's the general feel that it kind of understands what's going on, but it's unable to understand what it means, basically. It can understand the structure, but it can't really tell the difference between, when a wall could be scorched or when there's holes in the ground. It's just like, oh, there's holes in the ground sometime, so there needs to be holes
So
in the
yeah.
ground, but it's really unable to differentiate why those are there.
Hmm.
And that's something that I find very interesting because it's kind of like this weird thing where it's its own form of nature that's entirely based off of unnatural things in a way. So I just find it very interesting to look at this world that is like so completely not man-made but entirely dependent on things that are man-made, that I also think adds to the horror in the liminal space, that it's just like it looks like something that we should be able to comprehend, but we just can't. It's very similar to the Uncanny Valley, which, as any kid growing up in the 2000s, is probably very aware of that, because let's be honest, animation studios
Yeah.
got got a
Yeah.
bit carried away at points.
Sometimes, yeah. It's interesting because like actually, it's a really good idea, that AI thing. It's like an AI creating its own world, like you said. But it's funny because I was thinking about it earlier today before we got on, and I was wondering if it's some kind of representation of an odd divinity, right? Because even there's areas within like perfectly normal human constructed like places that defy the laws of physics or that aren't physically possible to recreate, like buildings clipping into each other, or uh, just stuff like that. There's stuff that moves around in peculiar ways and stuff, and there's creatures in there that shouldn't exist, right? And there's places that are, oh yeah, there was a level where there's an entrance room, and then you open the door out of the room, and the room has its own center of gravity, and it's flipped on its side. So when you open the door, you get transferred into the center of gravity that's outside of the door, which is this endless ocean. And so you basically fall through the door into the water. And that stuff like can't exist. Like a room with its own
Yeah.
center of gravity. I was thinking about it too. It's like because it feels so odd that like maybe it's a uh, I can't quite remember what I was thinking of about like the divine aspect of it, but the AI thing sounds actually better. I was just trying to figure out how the whole thing originated in the first place, because nobody's ever really given an origin story of it, which I think is also a big factor of why it's so scary to begin with. Is that even if you research into it, um, there's no story behind why it exists or what created it. It's
Yeah.
just this subtle reference of of a video game term of no clipping out of reality, which means that either the backrooms aren't reality or it's a new kind of reality. Either one is kind of scary because within that story realm, it's possible to get there. So it's possible to get into a new reality or out of reality, and existing there is odd.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like it's its own world, which is interesting. It, realistically, I guess the best thing you could call it is that it's its own dimension, I think, is the best way to describe it.
Or like maybe like how that one character from the Narnia books did. So there's that character in the first book that has the rings, and getting and he describes the rings as transporting to another world, but not just another planet, kind of like its own universe.
Yeah.
Right. I guess, yeah, like you said, it was pretty similar to that, I guess. That kind of idea. Just another place, maybe another space altogether, you know?
Yeah. I think what's also interesting is something that I think is really unique to Kane Pixels in a way, because a lot of the times whenever you follow the Backrooms, there's usually only one person, right? And so what I think is also more horrifying about it is whenever he brings in these group people, especially in things like missing persons, I think is the one where this guy just walks a few feet away and basically is now completely separated from his group, and he can even see his group and hear them, but it's very clear that he is not in the same space as them. So I think that's also
Oh,
something very cool that he did, because that means that as you're walking through the back rooms, even though it might seem like you're walking linearly, you're not. Which means that realistically, everything you see in the back rooms does not happen in the way we perceive it, in a way. It's functioning on a completely separate, I guess, time plane than us.
mm-hmm.
And that's just something that I don't, that just as you're one person walking through, you wouldn't really ever notice that. So I think it's really interesting that by seeing other people, that also brings in that horror that you can make one step and now it's seemingly possible that you can never go back. Is that's complete isolation if you make one mistake.
Yeah. No, yeah, because I believe it supports the idea of the original Backrooms canon that the spaces shift over time and like change its own construction over time if you wind up, because you can find yourself back at the start of where you started, and the layout is like completely different or something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that yeah, and the I think it was missing persons too, but it where they found no, it wasn't, it was a different one. But there was also um well, I don't know quite how to describe it, because it's funny because all of the views of the people that are going through the back rooms are through this VHS camera, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
like the old static filtered camera view, which makes the story, and like he dates them back to like 1990s or something. So that makes it very intriguing. Um, but also there was that character that got like scorched out and was like laying up against the wall that they did the
Yeah.
autopsy report video on. Um, gosh, that video was so scary when I saw that for the first time. Because when it gets to the end and the music like de-escalates like that, it was just, it was perfect.
Well, if I might, add something while you try and think about that. I think especially with things like autopsy report is also something that specifically we're going to go back to, my gaming groups. I think it's another type of horror that you will kind of realize if you ever played a game like Subnautica before, where it's the signs of life, as in you can basically see the aftermath of some event, but it's even scarier because you don't actually see the beginning or middle of that story. You only see the results, which basically means you are now aware of what can happen, but no idea of what can happen, basically. You have no knowledge of anything other than danger, which is something that I think fear really drives on, is that it's based in both danger and the fact that you don't know what that danger is. So I think that there's just something very terrifying about rounding a corner and suddenly there's a guy scorched up against a wall, like, with no other context. There's just something very, I don't know, viscerally terrifying about not
Yeah,
being able to know what's going on.
yeah. Yeah, I think that was the same with the Pitfalls episode too. I can only assume that there was a similar experience that happened with the guy who actually made it across the pitfalls because he was begging for the camera and then the guy fell in. But there was also that area with the broken chair and the cardboard on the floor, like somebody had been living there, right? Like in the area where he initially found the monster.
Yeah.
There was also something really terrifying about the. I can't remember quite what that episode name is right now. It was the mission report. Gosh, I'm gonna look it up real quick because it was the one where they're doing presentation where they're actually going to like start utilizing this what they call A space, right? Because the async found the backrooms, right? And so they're using the A space instead of like real world space because there's so much more of it than planet Earth. That in and of itself is kind of scary to me. They're going to utilize it and it's going to be so much cheaper, right? Like you see the graph grow in like amount of async space compared to like regular Earth space relative to like the costs and stuff. And the thing just keeps growing to the point where you can't even see the little dot of like regular space anymore. And then it still keeps growing. And it's very subtle. Basically, it's very scary that they've actually measured that it is so much more expansive than Earth, but they can't like break out of it, right? Like they can't. I have yet to see them like break out of the ceiling or figure out like where everything is, you know, and like they're gonna expand the gate and stuff so that they can get trucks in and stuff, and it's like it's scary. That's scary to me.
Yeah.
But it's so subtle, and that's the coolest thing about it. It's like it's there, and it's presented very normally, candidly, even one could say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that is an interesting point that, as an audience, we're supposed to, see the Backrooms as something scary because it's something scary. But to the people in universe, they just kind of treat it like, stonks.
Yeah.
And there is something, terrifying about the fact that you're like, this place isn't friendly to humans, but they keep treating like nothing's gonna go wrong, guys. Look at the profits. Look how big it is. We can't lose. And
even though they've already had like crew members in life-threatening situations and like maybe one who's already died or something, I don't remember.
yeah,
They had a bunch of other episodes, right?
yeah.
So
I don't remember per se if somebody dies. I don't think anyone. Oh well, I guess I don't think anyone of the like async has died.
oh, right. It's like that's that writing tool. I can't remember what the name of it is, but there's a writing tool where the audience is presented something to be sinister when everybody else doesn't know it, and they're just like, the scientists are just proceeding along with their scientific research, but we have that first Backrooms found footage thing where whoever entered the Backrooms clipped back into reality, like up in the sky, and then fell to his death.
Yeah, we know it's dangerous, but they don't necessarily know, or at least they don't know the full extent.
Yeah, which is probably what that episode. Which one was it? Report. That's probably what Report was for. Was them actually figuring out that this might be a scary thing. Because there's those scientists reviewing the footage, and it's like all like scary and stuff, Yeah, Backrooms is fun. Let's talk a bit about the VHS effect of it and how much scarier that makes it, because a lot of people consider that to be a massive impact of it because it feeds into this thing on the internet known as analog horror, where things are that much scarier because it looks old, hence you could assume that it might have happened, right? Because it's that much easier to believe when something is constructed to be older. right? Like
Yeah.
it's like it like you like maybe we could both agree that it's not nearly as scary if you take the VHS effect off. I mean, it's still scary,
Yeah.
but if you like if you bring it into the light of 2022 instead of 1993, it's not it's not nearly it's if it's not nearly as scary, it's a different
Yeah.
kind of scary that doesn't have nearly the same impact.
Yeah, I agree. And it's something interesting because I think we're also kind of at a point where, like, I'm just curious to see how analog horror will evolve. Because if we think about it realistically, humans have not had video for a very long time. So that's a very new thing. And it's weird because if you think about it, it has to do with something more than it merely being old. Because they're not like, it's not like they're having the 1920s effects where it's all black and white and then anytime there's dialogue, they get the little card that like, oh, golly
The silent
gee.
films,
Yeah,
yeah.
like,
Yeah, it's not too old.
yeah, it's like we understand that that would be a bit like, ridiculous. So it's interesting that this specific place and time, like just this, I think there's like basically from the 80s to the early 2000s. I don't think the early 2000s count as analog horror, but there are certain series online that kind of go back then that aren't technically analog horror, but I'm throwing them in here because I think they count as they're kind of shot in an old way.
Well, it's the old video formats
Yeah.
of like the first digital cameras are so much lesser quality than the VHSs. I mean, like, yeah, early 2000s, and I have this experience because I mean, I'm a metal guitarist, right? And I love metal guitarists, and Dimebag Darrell, one of my favorites. There's plenty of footage from Pantera that's like really good definition from like the 90s stuff, and then when he's in Damage Plan in the early 2000s, the videos are sometimes like 240 or 144, and the audio quality is like super chunky and bad because that's what they had at the time. And that's like all the footage we get, and it's ultra hard to restore and sometimes impossible to restore because uh it's too bad.
Yeah.
So it's not like maybe analog horror would evolve into that era, assuming all the stories that have happened could progress into that era, and then but then that actually the impact might be lessened because then the definition becomes lower, which means that it's more difficult to make out what's scary, which actually could be scary, but it's still not the same effect as tape. There's
Yeah.
something about tape that's so appealing.
Yeah, and I'll agree that, and it's interesting because I see a lot of things labeled as analog horror, but I find it interesting because they tend to use that format very differently. Like I don't know how much you know about this, but the Mandela catalogs use its analog horror in a very different way than something like the Backrooms. Like I wouldn't really say that the Mandela it doesn't really get its horror from the fact that it's like, this old found footage per se. But something like, Kane Pixels or even something like Gemini Home Entertainment very much does. So it's interesting that they both fit under this, title of analog horror, and yet they all use it in very different ways to get their point across.
The Mandela catalog is the Maple County stuff, right? Where it's
Yeah.
the police training tapes for the familiars, the bad doppelganging creatures of human being lookalikes.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna say I remembered that name, and then I had more. I was like, oh wait, that actually might not be what I was thinking about. Okay, yeah, Mandela catalog. Yeah, that's different though because the funny part about those catalogs to me is that you're able to select options on the tape, and so that tells me that either it was pre-recorded, um, like in the game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like assuming that you're not playing the game and that this actually happened, or like you're playing out what happened as the story, right? Like either they were able to screen record or capture what the screen was looking like as they were selecting the options, or um, they had technology to select on that effect. which in and of itself is strange. It's not necessarily scary, but the strangeness adds on to the scary in such a way that it's just it doesn't necessarily conflict, but it's help me out here. It's like
Uh, it's
maybe I don't know, it just adds to the uncanniness of it, I guess.
yeah.
Yeah. But then on the other side too, well, not on the other side, but I guess in the middle maybe, because on the one hand you've got Mandela Catalog, and on the other hand you've got Kane Pixels, where it's one is like presented as a story that's already happened and that's like pre-recorded and it's in the past, strictly in the past.
Yeah.
On the other hand, Mandela Catalog's like interactive and stuff, and that it's interactive. And then in the middle, I suppose there's like the fan creations of FNAF lore, where there's the security cameras, but then it cuts to these screaming screens with the effects over it that make everything sound scary, and then there's like the characters that talk to you through text on the screen, which is odd because that's not supposed to happen. Things don't talk to you in text in front of you like that, but for some reason it's the VHS effect that makes it so scary. And maybe it's because now people have associated that VHS effect with something that can just make something scary now. If you already have something like vaguely scary, just slap on a VHS effect and it's like terrifying, right?
Yeah.
But it's the FNAF lore like videos, like the ones from Meme Bear, where it's like the security camera stuff. It's so it's weird.
I think the scariness of like the VHS effect might have something to do with similarly the same reason that like Liminal Spaces and Uncanny Valley work. I think it has something to do with the fact that we can recognize what it's supposed to be, but like it's so low resolution that it's like, oh, this doesn't look proper. I think it could be something like that. It's kind of weird because I always would think that, if you put a filter on something, that puts you one more step back from it, basically. You're one layer back from reality. But weirdly enough, I think the VHS kind of puts you more in that position, which I know logically is wrong because not everybody in the 80s, saw like they were looking through a VHS camera. But for whatever reason, my mind has decided that, that's just how it looked back then.
There wasn't color until the
60s. Yeah. Exactly. Like, logically, I know that's wrong, but my brain's like, yep, it was just in black and white before then. No color.
Yeah, because there's no evidence that the world was in color before then.
And I think that might be something to do with just, like, how high def our world is that, in a way, we're so used to seeing fake things through with, like, no layers, where it's basically, very clear, that almost in a way that now we assume that's like, oh, okay, even though I'm seeing this, it may not be real. Just because it looks real doesn't mean it's real. So in a way, I think putting this filter on it kind of pulls our mind back away, being like, oh, this isn't something that I can immediately dismiss as, nonsense in a weird way. Like, it really doesn't logically make sense, but I think our brains just kind of have this, like, not necessarily switch, but like it just kind of clicks onto that VHS effect and kind of says, oh, this isn't what we're used to. There could be something bad here. That this is unnatural. You recognize it's unnatural, and now we're already kind of like primed in a way to be scared. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's also, I guess, probably due to the fact that you were talking about how high definition our world is and how we see everything now in like, we have media that we consume that's all in like 4K, and there's like really good animations and stuff. I actually think it might be related to animations nowadays too, because a lot of the people that create these use the VHS effect not only for the scariness aspect, but also to hide certain mistakes within the animations itself that also make it look more convincing at the same time, right? Because like it wouldn't be nearly as scary if it was like some, I I don't know. I mean, think about like some of the interviews that some SCP creatures have had with the staff members, like the plague doctor character. I've listened to the audios of those, and the audio qualities are like really crummy, right? Or at least they've been filtered to be really crummy. Like, it wouldn't be nearly as convincing or scary if we had it in like our professional mics, you know, like if we had the plague doctor on the podcast, you know,
Yeah.
it wouldn't be nearly as scary. It may be a different kind of off-putting, but again, it wouldn't be nearly as scary because, again, I guess just because, like what you said, like I guess we identify this poorness of quality, I suppose, as something from the past. So seeing that thing from the past invoke this much emotion in us, I suppose, or this much fear, yeah. It it just feels wrong. Like this shouldn't be working the way it should because this is something old enough of the past, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I yeah.
Yeah, I agree because it's also something that just to add to your point is that like something like Five Nights at Freddy's. I think one of the reasons why the animatronics are also so scary is because we know that like things from that era don't do that. Like if you were to tell me that a Chuck E. Cheese robot went wild and injured some people nowadays, I'd be like, yeah, okay, like
Yeah.
I'd be like, yeah, no, I completely believe that because stuff like that just happens. Well, no, I'm not saying that Chuck E. Cheese goes insane and kills a bunch of children, but things like that malfunction. We understand that things today have the potential to do stuff like that. It's not abnormal, but there's something like back in the 80s, we understand that things don't work that way. They can't do that. So whenever they do that, it just instills a fear of us because we realistically know that that's impossible. So why is it happening? In a way,
Right.
that's kind of also, I think, in a way, how the backrooms work, is that we know it's impossible, but it's still there. Just because we
Yeah.
know that it can't happen, the fact that it's happening is really scary. And another reason why I think this old style is kind of scary is I think a lot of fear can also come through the inevitability of stuff. Because also something, if you played Subnautica before, you know that you can't really stop anything. Is that it's going to happen. So I think finding this old found footage stuff is also scary because basically you can't do anything about it. It's telling you a story in the past and you don't know how it ends, so it's something that say you come across the Mandela catalog. You can't really stop what's going on. Which kind of means you can basically just sit back and watch it unfold. But there's no real way that this ends kind of in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
I think a better example of that is Local 58.
Yes. I know of Local 58. Yeah.
I think that's a good example of kind of where you're just kind of forced to sit back and watch as it unfolds with the knowledge that nothing can be changed. It's just going to unfold, and that your life may or may not be affected by this. There's just something about finding something from the past that cannot be changed. You have no effect over it, and I think that can add to the fear.
Yeah. It's funny too because then your brain would try to resort, I guess, to thoughts that this isn't real. This didn't happen. You're fine. But it's still just as scary because
Yeah, and I
of that
think in a way,
illusion, I guess.
since it's also said in the past, even though you can rationally say this didn't happen, your brain can shoot back, but it happened in the past. How do you know that didn't happen? It's the same thing like back when Five Nights at Freddy's was blowing up, that some people were convinced it really happened.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously no.
Yeah,
But
the bite of 87 was not a thing.
but for whatever reason, our brains really like to be like, But what if it did? It's possible.
Yeah, and that's probably brought about by the old style effects laid on the videos.
Yeah.
Yeah, like because like if something was set in like 2021 or something, like it would be so obvious that it wouldn't happen because we've got technology now that makes everything look so much, you know, um, not that.
Yeah.
But then there's also like scary stuff that has happened in real life that for some reason human beings do have footage of. Like
Yeah.
I'm not going to get into details because it's horribly gruesome, but there are videos out there that the police, that some police departments just will not release because it's too horribly gruesome. And it's in that style. It's old, it's recorded in that way. And so I guess it's kind of an unconscious connection in your brain between these things, right?
Yeah.
It's like I don't know if this is a very good example or not, but it just occurred to me. There was a video I was watching one time where something scary was about to happen, and it was like mildly scary, and I had kind of already an idea of what was going to happen, and I didn't really think that I wasn't going to be scared by it. I knew I wasn't going to be scared by it, but I'm not kidding. As soon as it happened, my computer crashed. The whole computer just crashed. And so I get the visual, the screen glitches out, there's this piercing in my ears of a crashing computer, and I flip out and I lock up I turn off the computer and just run away for like an hour. And I come back, I turn the computer on and everything's fine, and I know that everything's fine, and it was just the computer crashing. But now every time I hear that sound in like anything, even if it's just a demo, like an old computer demonstration or something, like if I'm watching a channel of like old technology or something and I hear a crashing sound, there's still this tick in my brain that's like, oh my gosh, that's terrifying. When I know perfectly well that nothing is happening like that's bad and this is all intended. Like, but it's that kind of unconscious connection in my brain now that I can't really ever disconnect. Like a crashing sound or like a person's voice just kind of going, brrr, you know, if they're like mid-sentence, it's just, ugh.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I can see that.
It's a true story. It's a true story.
I believe it. That
was, hands down, I
technology
couldn't sleep for a week after that.
technology has an amazing way to fail at like the most horrifying of times.
It's an odd thing though, like how we perceive it to be horrifying. Like we could just perceive it as just technology not doing its job, and we could just get angry.
Yeah.
And I mean that happens for a lot of things, but for very certain things are just scary. And it's amazing how we comprehend things like that.
Yeah.
And like compartmentalize things to be either scary or enraging or, you know, stuff like that.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, that just leads me into something that isn't really relevant to the rest of this. Well, it's relevant to it, but it's kind of separate. That I just find fun, and in its own way, really scary. So it's this idea to do with, you know, the Uncanny Valley, right? That, you know, there's animations that they look human, but they're not quite human, and it's scary to a lot of people. But I saw somebody point out, and this is just something that scared me for a while, and now I find really funny because that's the way my brain works, that in a way, since we can recognize things that aren't human but kind of look it, and that's scary to us, it kind of implies that at some point the human psyche had a reason to need to identify between humans and what merely looked like humans, which in of itself is a terrifying thought. Realistically, is that the reason? Probably no. I don't really believe it, but I find it an interesting idea. And if the idea is true, yeah, it's really scary. But I also don't really think it's, you know, true. I think there's other reasons for that. But
So did the Mandela catalog events actually occur at some point in human history?
exactly, it's something like that. It's like, but it could. It could
Yeah.
have happened.
You don't know. You don't know. And then you start looking stuff up for an unlengthy amount of time. And then dad comes in and he's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Researching something." Dad's just like, "You
Exactly.
idiot."
You wouldn't understand.
Yeah. Yeah. That is interesting though. Yeah, the whole let's talk a bit more about uncanniness then. Even outside of human not humanity, but humanesque things, there's stuff there's stuff that resembles things we associate with in real life that aren't right, you know.
Yeah.
um I thought I had an example, and now it kind of died out of my head. There's like um I don't know. For me, it's as simple as like seeing the world regular except under a red sky. It's
Yeah.
like, ooh, that's off-putting because I associate reality as something completely different.
Yeah. Um, I don't know. This is really the only example I have of this, of like kind of, and it goes back to faces and all this stuff. Is that there are people who look very different, right? Some of them have genetic informalities, or they can go through like horrible injuries and stuff. And the weird
Mm.
thing is, I've never found that scary, really. It's always just been like, oh, okay, I can recognize that, something happened. Move on.
Yeah,
So it's weird to me that something like the Uncanny Valley really does affect me. It's something weird that it's like I know it's not quite right. It's just this weird sense that it's like, I can recognize what's human and what's not, even though realistically there's some things that, look less like humans, but I'm like, oh, that, it's just a normal person.
yeah.
But there's other things that a lot of other people would say, well, they look more human, and it's like, but it's clearly not.
It must be I guess I would argue that that's probably a perception thing and that perception being um, based on how you've been taught or grown to see things and view things. Like I've had similar experiences where I can tell if people have gone through serious injuries, and then I go online and I look at Mandela catalog and stuff, and like obviously that stuff isn't real, and I can also figure out why people look a certain way, and I can think of enough scenarios to where yeah, that there's a reason why that person looks like that in real life, and then something that's like like Mandela catalog stuff. It's obviously it's obviously impossible to look like that. Like I'm fairly certain no matter what happens, it's very impossible to look like that, and still that's the scary part about it is that they look like that, and it could be an injury if they didn't look so clean.
Yeah.
They are like the creatures are very um I had the word. They look normal to them.
Mm-hmm.
It looks regular for that thing to look like that thing. It looks as if it is working within its intended purpose and nature to look like that thing, not from some existential problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like not from some outside force. It looks strictly like that in its nature. That's probably the scariest part,
Mm-hmm.
is that it shouldn't look that good at looking that scary, or other way around. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll say another thing about this that I find interesting that I think is actually probably a better example is if you've ever visited thispersondoesnotexist.com. That's another thing that I find really interesting because it comes up with really good human generations, but they're off. And sometimes you can tell, sometimes you can't. But it's just so I'm not scared of it, really. I don't know what it is, but it's just interesting to see these people that are, like very close but a little off, and then other times they're very off, but that's not really what I'm talking about. I think it
Yeah,
especially has to do with eyes. Weirdly enough, I think eyes are something that really can set off the uncanny valley. I don't know, it's hard to describe. I just wanted to bring up this person does not exist. because
No, I get it.
it's a
I'm
really
I'm
cool site.
reloading the page right now a few times, and yeah, these people look very real.
Yeah, and then other times you'll get people who like have a baseball cap but made out of hair, um, which are funnier than anything. But yeah, it's.
Yeah,
I just wanted to bring up the website because I think it's cool for anyone who like kind of wants to know what the Uncanny Valley is like, or just kind of has that feeling that it's just an interesting site.
it's funny because looking at that site by itself for me doesn't trigger that feeling that the Uncanny Valley is being like I'm not entering it, but it does blur the line between the Uncanny Valley and the reality, right? Because with the
Yeah.
knowledge that the website provides, that being that this person does not exist, uh, it's amazing that it looks like someone I've known. Like one of those pictures right there
Mhm.
looked straight up looked like someone I knew. It didn't. Like it wasn't that person I once
Yeah.
knew, but it came very close. But it wasn't close in the sense that it was scary because it was like malformed. It was close as in it just is another person that looks very similar. And that doesn't instill any fear in me, but knowing that the person doesn't exist, it's like, oh, you
Yeah.
know?
I think it's kind of the reverse of the Uncanny Valley in a way. That is, when this person does not exist. It looks human, but you know it's not. Wait, no, that was the wrong way around. Yeah, no. I guess it really isn't the
No, it's that
opposite.
the person looks human, but this human doesn't exist. Because it's not that
Yeah,
the person is not human, the person just doesn't
right.
exist, period. That
Hmm.
face does not exist in this world.
It's entirely artificial.
Yeah. It's different from a human not looking human.
Hmm.
But it's funny because still some people have that feeling of oddness when looking at that site like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe it's just the AI generator gets a little buggy at times. I don't know.
Um. Yeah. What else? What else?
FNAF. I don't know.
Oh yeah. Do you want to talk about the Walton Files?
Well, yeah, yeah. Let's talk about the Walten Files. Yeah.
I will go into this saying this is mostly on you because I'm aware of these things, but um, I've been way more interested recently in watching Security Breach crash and burn than anything real. So be aware, I'm not really in depth on any of the FNAF VHS stuff. That's more on the
Okay.
periphery.
Well, Walten Files isn't FNAF. It's
Well,
a
yeah, but
spin-off
it's
of. Yeah, no, I get it.
it's all the same thing. I'm
Gosh,
not part of the
Security Breach.
fandom. I could say it's all the same thing.
Security Breach is a fun game, but it's so buggy.
I love it. It's the epitome of like everything wrong with the video game industry, and I love it so much. I don't even have it. If it was cheaper, I would get it. Like that's what makes it even better. Is that it's a game I love, but they charge so much for such a broken game that I'm not gonna buy it, which is another reason I love it, because it's like I'm not even willing to play this. It's too much.
No, no. If somebody gave you money specifically to buy it, I think you'd buy it to read a troll video about it
Yeah,
because you just have it on your computer as a troll thing.
I love it. It's so good. Well, no, it's not. That's why I love it.
I'm sorry, Scott. I'm so sorry, Mr. Coffin. Oh. Anyways, yeah. So Walton Files, I guess, are um, similar to the Kane Pixels Backrooms. I would say, in a sense that it is a story. It's a story, and it's got a definitive plot, I suppose. Well, Kane Pixels doesn't quite have a definitive plot at the moment, but
Mm.
Walton Files has a plot of sorts, and uh, it's real. The the freakishness of that this could have happened, right? Because there's an additional part of the story where the things from the company, like it's another restaurant type deal with the animatronics, right? And the thing is that the restaurant, unlike FNAF, doesn't stay there, and the animatronics don't live in the thing anymore. Everything from the restaurant gets shipped into this security bunker in the middle of nowhere, but it's like a high level like security bunker built out of like military grade materials and everything. And there are people that still work for this company-ish thing, the franchise, I guess, that have to go in and inspect the stuff, I guess. And that's really where the scariest part for me comes in, is because one of the workers finds a tape, and there's an animatronic that plays tape machine or tapes, right? It's got a tape machine built into it, and the tape says, "Don't play this tape." And she's like, "Oh, I'm going to play this tape," and it's in the middle of this dark bunker. They've got no lights except for their flashlights. So, guess what? She plays the tape, and it's scary, and scary stuff happens. And the problem is that the place already reeks, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like, there was footage that somebody had already tried to enter the bunker before, and when they discovered what was in there, ran back to their car and tried to get out of the forest as fast as they could or something. I actually might be conflating this with something else. But anyways, they get stopped by whatever this thing is that's chasing after them, somehow going at like 55 miles an hour, because it's a forest road. He can't go that fast, but he's going as fast as he can without like killing himself, right? But this thing catches him and destroys the car and kills him and all that, It's a different kind of scary because it's the hyper-aggression is real, and the story is very scary, especially when one of the, I think, descendants of the owners has this like severe amnesia or something, where like something happened and then they got like fixed up to where they couldn't remember it, and then they're playing this game that the franchise had or something that was based off of the characters of the franchise that somehow brought back all the memories, because there were certain scenes that played through as the game was glitching, but nobody says anything as the game is glitching. So that makes it odd, because it's like the glitches are happening and they're not noticing it. But then like eventually they do notice it and stuff does happen, and the girl remembers everything and she's friggin' terrified. But it's, I don't know. It's not. It's still that. It's still that analog horror deal that just convinces you like somehow this did happen, because it's a very linear sequence of events, and it's pretty believable.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I'm the one who's talking about something I can't entirely remember, but
It's fine.
doing the best I can.
It's fine.
Yeah.
So I know you mentioned some of like Meme Bear and those VHS tapes.
Mm-hmm.
You want to talk about those for a bit? Those are ones that I'm more familiar with, to be honest.
In regards to this analog type thing.
Sure, we can go with that.
Well, I mean, where do you want to go with this? I don't want to talk forever.
I think. All right. So here's my take. I want to kind of go into the found footage genre. I think what's interesting is that you walk a thin line with found footage stuff. Because, the entire thing is that this is found footage. And I just find it interesting because there's like, it's weird that we're so accepting of this style. Like, from what I've seen of the FNAF VHS tapes by like the funny name creators, I don't remember their names. I just remember they all have funny names.
The instructional videos by Squimpus McGrimpus or whatever his face was.
It's interesting because I think they walk this very thin line that I'm impressed by all the major series, because this is something that I think they do well, is that I never find myself questioning, why does this footage exist? When I take a step back and look at it from like an in the universe and as a world building perspective, it doesn't always make a lot of sense. Sometimes it doesn't make any sense at all, like how.
Yeah.
But they do a really good job of keeping you kind of in it at the time. They never really question why it's been found. In some ways, I think that's also that kind of adds to the terror of
Or
that.
how it's been found.
Yeah, yeah. It's just this very interesting kind of horror where it's like you can see the past unfold. I guess it's just going back to like you can't stop it, but I think it's also in the sense that like it could still be out there.
Yeah.
I guess. I think that's something that I think the original FNAF did really well. Is that it's basically like you learn, all this stuff. You learn all these like horrible events that went on, and then you realize that it's like no one's really stopped. They're kind of still going with all this stuff. Like it's not like this stuff is like dead and gone. It's
Yeah.
still kind of out there, and that's a bit like, oh, that that's not pleasant. That's not pleasant at all.
That actually is what makes it easier to believe that it is fiction, which is the funny part because that actually should be. I always tell myself that should be the comforting part for me, is that nobody ever stops this. So of course this couldn't be real because, for goodness sakes, if something to an even less degree like that happened in real life, dude, there would be court hearings on the spot. Franchises would be like, dude, like eradicated. There would be people in jail faster than you could blink. Like reaction time in horror stuff is so notoriously slow that it's almost laughable because it's like, of course this couldn't happen. Of course this didn't happen. I don't even know why I have to tell myself that because of course this didn't happen. Because like realistically, the amount of time it takes for like stuff to form out and like all these horrible things that have happened and then keep going, like there's no way that it could have kept going for that long. But my brain says but it could have.
But it could have.
That is probably the scariest part for me, is that I have to tell myself it couldn't have happened because everything took so dang long.
Yeah, that is something that like taking a step back and looking at a meta level is kind of hilarious. Like this is something that I always found like super funny about the original Five Nights at Freddy's. Is that how offhand it's like, oh yeah, they shut down the pizzeria for a few days because the robots were dripping blood and mucus. And then the world's just kind of like, well, that's kind of weird. Anyways,
like he stuffed bodies inside of animatronics, and like nobody could find the bodies. Nobody questioned it. There was a smell coming from them, but I don't know.
I don't. Yeah, it's like must be the wind.
A lot of people write off as lazy writing, but honestly, I don't care.
I don't care either. I don't think it's lazy writing. I think it's just like, you just kind of have to suspend your disbelief. I like it more because that just makes it so much funnier from an outside perspective. Like, it's like, all right.
It makes the scary stuff slightly more palatable too, really.
Yeah, it's like, all right, so we got 5 missing children. We got these 5 animatronics that are acting weird at night. And they're oozing blood. Man, if only there's somebody who could piece this together. Anyways.
Anyways, back to whatever else we were doing, yeah.
Yeah, then they just like, all right, anyways.
Yeah. I mean, it's the only way to do it unless to not turn it into just some like average criminal story where, guy did bad thing, they've put 2 and 2 together, he gets caught for doing a horrible thing.
Yeah.
Whatever. And that's probably just a way to not bring about that kind of story. But at the same time, it's kind of funny. And that is what I tell myself is like, it's supposed to lessen the scary effect of it. But then I tell myself, but the actual thing he did.
Yeah.
Now that scariness trumps the absurdity of him not being caught. Like it overrides it.
Yeah.
And I don't know why, but it does. And because of that, it's super cool.
Yeah, and I agree. Once again going back to like the only horror game I've even remotely played, which is Subnautica. That's something that the humor in it is really good about, because like in the middle of like all these monstrous creatures and trying to escape this world, you just kind of have this robotic PDA just kind of going, your favorite activity was swimming, like when you could only swim. There's something, it's like sometimes you just need to take a step back and just look at the absurdity of the situation, and it doesn't remove the horror. But I think that every good horror thing has a mix of this terror and kind of this comedy. Because once again, something that horror really does a lot is absurdity. And that's something that comedy does a lot. So I think
Mhm.
it's really nice to see creators that will, like, put in, like, this is terrifying. But at the same time, you're trapped on a water world and, swimming was your favorite activity. I just thought I'd let you know.
Okay, well, I mean, and kind of like imagine being told that too. You're just kind of sitting there like, wait, did I just hear that right?
Yeah, like, yeah.
It's like, okay, what am I supposed to do with that information? Nothing. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Trying to think of good example of that in like any of
It's
the.
funny because it's like this kind of thing is different from like other kind of horror that I I'm weird. I would almost classify stuff like, do you know what Iron Lung is?
Yeah.
Okay, yes. Okay, you know what Iron Lung is. I would classify that as analog horror of its own time. Like I know
Yeah.
that it's set in like future, right? Like when
Yeah.
the Earth's resources run out or whatever, and then like we have to go to the stars or something and stuff like that. But it's not analog horror because you're kind of stuck in one spot. But it's it no it, that no that's what it is. It trips back to the Uncanny Valley area because
Hmm.
you're in a ocean of blood on a moon. You actually know the type of blood. Like
Hmm.
they have the blood type, right? Like
Yeah.
they know what the blood is, and you're sent there as a prisoner, like a convict, to figure out what's going on in the blood ocean. For goodness knows what, because who in their right mind would send anyone to a blood ocean to find anything good, as if there's anything going to be good there? But um, I guess it relates to the uncanniness is what it was what I meant to say. I guess because it's not
Yeah.
necessarily analog horror, but it everybody that covers analog horror stuff and does analog horror things, Iron Lung just got on the radar real quick
Yeah.
for some weird reason because it's presented in a very modern sense, right?
Yeah.
Like it's CGI, and the creator has made other similar games. It's open world stuff, and there's no like hazy filter over you and anything. So it's not like you're recording something with an old camera. You're there.
Yeah.
I guess it's the uncanniness that makes it so trippy. Like it's just went like 0 on everything else and just 100 on, or not, nah, not 0 on everything, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. That I think there's also like, I think we're gonna see basically an expansion of this analog horror idea, because as you said before, even within things that we can clearly classify as analog horror, they act in very different ways. Things like the Mandela Catalog, Local 58, and Kane Pixels, they all use that analog horror setting in very different ways. And something like Iron Lung manages to somehow be in a situation where there should be absolutely no analog horror and manages to make it feel like it should fit into that category, despite in universe it being nothing like the other ones. But
Yeah.
aesthetically and just by how it plays and how it looks, he's kind of managed to, like, I would say that, yeah, it's kind of analog horror. It doesn't really fit well with anything else. That's its
Yeah.
closest cousin, so it's kind of has to go in there.
It's probably the pictures that the submarine takes, but at the same time, it's also not because you can open up the stuff in the developer thing and like you can see all the stuff in the actual map. Like there's
Yeah.
videos of people that go through the maps and stuff, right? And like sound triggers and all that. Um, yeah, it's just yeah. I guess people just lumped it into analog horror because actually, people probably didn't even put it in analog horror at all. It's just an
Mm-hmm.
assertion I've kind of made, and I guess you agree with, because, like you said, there's not really any other place to put it because it's too simple to be in anything else.
Yeah, it doesn't even really resemble many of like the indie horror games that get super powerful. Are the ones that it do borrow a lot from analog horror. Like there's this game Shipwreck 64, maybe. Oh, there's the timer. Interesting.
All
Um,
right.
but there's this game called Shipwreck 64, I believe, and it basically is a video series on an old N64 game, mixed in with, like tapes of people dying. So it's this weird sense that it's like, I feel like right now we're defining analog horror as too narrow of a thing. I think we're going to slowly see that expansion as it expands out and just more and more media takes up the mantle. Basically, what I'm saying is that don't just think about analog horror as very specific, like videos. I think we're going to
Mm.
see a big expansion, and there's just something about the look. It it feels more like it's going to become an aesthetic rather than any specific genre.
What probably also is for the it's slightly unrelated, but I'll get back to it. I think if I can tie this together right, is that the reason why analog horror is so weird is because I already touched on it, I think, but bad stuff has happened that has been captured on similar footage,
Mm-hmm.
right? And like abhorrent stuff,
Mm-hmm.
stuff that's like on the level of this fictional stuff. So you do question the reality of the fictional stuff briefly and whether or not it's real, but the other thing is that analog horror has, like you said, it's narrowly defined at the moment as something that kind of restricts like true analog horror to just the VHS style effect, because that's the aesthetic that people immediately associate with it, and it's kind of maturing right now. Like the analog horror thing, I guess, is kind of going through its adolescent phase where it's trying to figure out what else it can take in too, because it's because analog horror kind of refers to stuff that's like the way in which it's spelled analog. That's like it's physical.
Mm-hmm.
It's the tangible footage, right? Like tapes, film, stuff that isn't like, like digital format, right? But I think at some point it will expand to recordings of DVDs on CRTs,
Yeah.
and yeah, or like, yeah, probably like DVDs and stuff like that, because that in and of itself is still physical in a sense. I mean, nowadays with our generation, everybody's all like, yeah, DVDs and VHS, and like they kind of lump it all together. At least people I talk to, it's like DVDs are the VHS of our time or something. And I'm sitting here like, well, that's interesting, because when will Blu-ray become the VHS of its time?
Bro, that's going to be so goofy. Imagine like Generation Alpha being like, yo, look at this found footage tape on Blu-ray. Like,
It's like, yeah, it's like 4K found footage stuff, and
yeah, it's
I'm
like
sitting here as my boomer Gen Z type, like, no,
I
this isn't real.
remember when Blu-ray was invented.
I was there, bro.
The entire generation was just sitting around looking at the people making the first Blu-ray disc.
Yeah, duh. It always comes back around to us wondering what the heck the world's gonna be like when we become the boomers.
Exactly.
Oh man, fun, so fun.
Another thing that I just had a thought about that I think might also tie in Iron Lung with analog horror is this kind of sense of, as I said before, that you can't change anything. Even though Iron Lung is kind of in a first person perspective, every single time I've experienced it, I've always kind of felt like I was watching somebody else. I think there's a lot of times in a lot of games where you're supposed to like get into your character's head, but for a game like Iron Lung, I always felt a degree of separation. That's why, yes, I was playing as this guy, but this guy wasn't me. So in also a sense, it kind of felt like I was finding out this guy's story, and the fact that I couldn't, there was no escape for him. It's kind of doomed from the start in a way, because of my,
Right.
logical assumption that blood ocean equals not good.
Yeah.
Shockingly, I know that might be a hot take, but in general, I think lakes of blood are undesirable.
Yeah.
So I think that also tied it in is that I have the same kind of sense of dread and foreboding that whenever I watch something like Local 58 or The Backrooms, is that even though to them they might not be trapped, from my perspective, they're already trapped in this horror. That's all I really had to say is that I think it ties in even in some thematic ways.
So it's much more of the um, psychological impact of Iron Lung matching that of analog horror
Yeah.
stuff that would uh, tell you to put it in that category,
Yeah,
basically.
it kind of feeds on the same area of fear that I think a lot of analog horror does.
Yeah. Same kind of same area of fear. Yeah, it's which is interesting because there's oh gosh, I had something. I think I was going to tie it back into the back rooms actually.
Could we go to a new meeting link real quick?
Oh, yes.
Sorry.
Okay, so
Anyways,
there were two. I remembered what I was going to talk about. They're
all right.
related to the Iron Lung deal, I guess, or kind of why. Maybe a sense of how Iron Lung gets into that same psychological area of fear that analog horror does. That being something that it shares in common with the Backrooms, actually, which is something I don't think a lot of people will compare Iron Lung to the Backrooms, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's two things, namely darkness and monstrosity. It's very dark, even in that submarine.
Mm-hmm.
And in everything horror, obviously, you're probably going to want things in the dark, right? Because darkness is where you can't see. So it's kind of scary, right? Um, but there's also the other side of it. The feeling of absolute hopelessness sets in when you're in something that you know to be absolutely monstrous.
Mm-hmm.
It's a ocean of blood. You know how big an ocean is. That's that's madness. That's enormous, right? Backrooms is enormous. The original 4chan post described it as what? Approximately 600 million square miles of the same textured thing. And if we go to the actual like SCP style thing where each and every level has that, they're either incredibly small or incredibly massive. Like there's entire cities that
Mm-hmm.
go on for infinity to the point where if you go far enough all the buildings clip into each other like it's some Minecraft bug, right? Like with the Minecraft bug with the weird
Yeah.
stacked worlds that just develop into like chunks of its own. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Um it's it's something about humans. It's funny because we as humans always strive to be the the biggest, right? The loudest
Mm-hmm.
voice in the room. We do all these big things. I mean, we sent a guy into space. We put guys on the moon, right? We have a space station. We're huge, right? Like we have this desire to explore and like become bigger than everything else in the world, I suppose, in some sense. The idea of the Backrooms, I guess, is that the monstrosity of the world is there, and it's just you. And there's no materials, and you're starting from scratch, or less than scratch. Nothing. You have nothing to compare to this monstrosity. And it's an infinite monstrosity, too. It would be palatable if it was diverse. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I am sure, I'm like 80% sure that being in an empty world and just restarting with a new Adam and a new Eve would be like if you just eradicated everyone from existence and just left all of old civilizations here with all the materials that we have, it would be far easier to get through than any level of the Backrooms, because it's diverse enough to cope with. I think that is one of the major impacts of the Backrooms, and from that other areas of horror is that it's massive. It's beyond anything you could even comprehend, which is why initially I thought the Backrooms to be some sort of metaphor for divinity, because it's something that we can't comprehend the existence of, like the fact that things clip into each other, the fact that you even clipped there in the first place, the fact that things out there defy the laws of physics. It's stuff that I initially thought to be something divine, because it's not. It's so incomprehensible how one would really be able to cope with that and not like go insane immediately, right?
Yeah.
Which is actually, now that I think about it, why FNAF is actually pretty cool. Because if you think about it, it's very small. Like, it's all limited to one space and a set defined characters, and it's all within its own like little story. It's not massive, but it's got this massive sense of fear. It invokes the same intensity, right?
Yeah.
And that's just great execution then, because the same intensity as something so massive and infinite. That's great.
I actually found your idea about, like the civilizations now new man would find it easier to cope with because of the diversity. I think that's also something that's interesting about the Backrooms. That definitely sets it apart from things like urban explorers and like destroyed civilizations, is that whenever you find an area that's been abandoned, you can tell there's history to it, right? You know that there is something that was here and is no longer here. And while that can be scary, in some ways it's like, all right, I at least know what's going on here. I know how it came here. But when you get to something like the Backrooms, which is the same thing ever extending, it gives you this idea that there is no history. That it's like always been, but at the same time's never aged. And that's what it goes on for an infinite amount of space. So in some ways, the Backrooms is terrifying because it is infinite in every sense of the word. It's eternal. It's this thing that, while you think it wouldn't be scary, is actually quite terrifying. Just the same thing that's always has been, always will be, and just goes on forever.
Yeah. It's like, that's what I was thinking of. I thought the Backrooms initially is a funny, to me, I interpret it as, and like I'm not one to interpret things like this at all, but I humored myself one time thinking about it as a blurring of the line between purgatory and hell. Because it's infinite and there's nothing you can do about it. Hell is only ever defined, like the only like the strictest definition of it, and its simplest definition of it, is a place not Earth. It's basically purgatory without hope. Right? Like in religions that believe in a purgatory and a hell and a heaven, hell is purgatory without hope, and purgatory is hell with the hope and the knowing that you're going to get to heaven eventually once you're purged. So the Backrooms, it's a blurring of the line to me, because in one sense there's no hope, because there's creatures there that can attack you, that can kill you, and there's no resources really, unless you're lucky enough to stumble across some. But even then, like a few resources in this infinite space, and if you somehow get into other levels, like you're still in infinite spaces. Like that's crazy. And so you wonder, is there even any hope of returning to the real world? Is there any hope of surviving? And it's this insane sense of unknowing with the with coupled with the monstrosity of everything around you, that like it's just weird. It's just weird like that, you know. Like
Yeah.
I know it's a bit of a stretch to call it like, I don't know. I'm not calling it like an homage of it or a reference to it or anything, but I mean, it was just a thought I had that I figured I'd bring up.
You know, I think that's actually a pretty cool way of thinking about it. And I kind of, I agree in a way. And what I think what makes it more interesting is the fact that you can't like break through it, right? I think that goes back to its eternity. Is that despite the backrooms not really doing anything, you also can't really stop it in a way. Like as you said, even though they're like transforming into living spaces, they can't break out of it. They're still confined by it. They can try and change it all they want, but we know that you can't really, you can only adapt to it. You can't change it. It's not
Yeah.
something fathomable. You can't stop eternity. You can't fight eternity. You can deal with it, but in some ways it goes back to the hopelessness that it's like there's fundamentally no way to change it.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah.
think that's also scary is that like we said like we've been saying about, you know, like finding this old stuff that already plays out, is that just the pure idea that there's something that we as humans fundamentally cannot change kind of scares us. That we're
Yeah.
so used to everything being able to be changed and adapted to us, the fact that we have to adapt to something else, I think kind of uneases us.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, because that kind of, I would say builds on the point I made about if all of humans were eradicated except you, like you would be able to survive like a little longer,
Yeah.
because you've still got all of these things and these materials around you that you can still make the world conform to your needs. You can
Hmm.
still adapt to the world and the world adapt to you, and you can still live. And the world isn't eternal, right? It might feel that way. I mean, if you're the only one left, and then like all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, there's nothing. You know,
Hmm.
it's uh, yeah, yeah. You can't fight eternity, but also that's the funny thing is that at the same time, there's nothing completely to fight about it.
Hmm.
Not only can you fight it, not only can you not fight its infinity, nobody really tries because they already know that.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing really to fight in infinity. Because it's infinite, I suppose.
Yeah. It's kind of that weird conundrum, like I said, is that despite the backrooms not doing anything, also the best way to put it is you can't stop it. Even though there's nothing really to do about it, just the idea that we can't do anything about it kind of scares us. Even though, like, there's physically nothing to be done about it. Not in the sense that's like, well, you can't change it now. In the sense that there's literally nothing to be done. There's no
Yeah.
course of action ever that can even affect it, anyways.
Yeah. It's That's crazy. That's crazy, man. It's like it's funny because people who create this kind of thing, it's like for me it's kind of like the a human attempting to convey what divinity must be like, in eternity. I
Hmm.
mean, can we say that we're both Catholics so I can make this easier for me myself to say?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Like you and I, we're both Catholics. We believe in a heaven and a purgatory and a hell, and that those realms are infinite in time and space and all of that. Um, so the back rooms being this idea of infinity with nothing happening, but nothing to do about it, but no it to do anything about. If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
That's That's crazy because it's not. It's like it's almost not even any of those three. It's not heaven, hell, or purgatory because it's just there. It just
Hmm.
exists, and it's like it's not saying like, yeah, I exist. What are you gonna do about it? It just says I exist.
There's no purpose to it in a way. It merely
Yeah,
exists. In a way, like what you're going like at the very earlier, what you kind of said is that it kind of felt like a creation that was weird and like divine. The way I kind of understood it, it's kind of this idea of creation without cause. It's simply there. There's no reason to it. Nothing. It merely exists for literally no discernible reason. It's just there. And I think in a
yeah.
way that too can kind of scare us in the sense that, that what does it mean for something to have no purpose? It's just merely there. What do we do with it?
Well, that's the funny thing because we have an answer for that as human beings. We typically cast things that have no purpose aside because they're typically things that have no purpose are small in
Hmm.
comparison to the back rooms, okay? But even in our
Yeah.
own lives, some things are small and we can handle them by not giving them any purpose and just chucking them. I mean, like there's
Yeah.
lots of things that we even give purpose that have no purpose, you know? Like I don't know, fidget spinners don't have purpose to me. Like, but then you have something like the Backrooms where it does exist with no purpose, but again, its size
You can't throw
makes
it
it
away.
scary. Yeah, you can't discard it or just disregard it as something like, don't worry about it. It's got no purpose. It's
Yeah.
just there. No, it's just there.
Don't worry about the infinite other dimension over there. It's fine. Like you can't really do that.
Yeah. Yeah, especially if you get trapped there.
Yeah.
Like you're kind of stuck there, and then you're like, "Oh shoot, now what?" Now I'm no, and then that's the funny thing is then it wraps back around to you having no purpose there
Yeah.
because now you're stuck in an infinite space with nothing to do and nothing to give it purpose except to exist and then die. Now
Yeah.
you actually have no purpose because there is no one there and nothing there to give you purpose. There's nothing to do.
Yeah.
That's mad.
Yeah, I think that also just goes to the terror. That's always something that I thought about when looking at the backrooms is to think about you're trapped in a place at where there is no purpose to anything, where it all ends in the exact same way. Even exploration, since it goes on forever, there's no real point to that. It's kind of the worst parts of immortality, in a way. That it's putting a finite being into an infinite place, and just fundamentally it can't exist with us.
Yeah.
It goes against everything that we know and perceive. And I think that's where the terror comes from, that it's so alien to us that
Yeah.
it's just simply triggers our fear because we know that we can't do anything about it and it's not right for us, but we can't change that.
Yeah. Much like, would you say it's something like the unstoppable force meeting an immovable object? Like
Yeah.
something just incomprehensible?
Yeah, it's kind of like a paradox, putting a finite being in an infinite situation. How does that work? Neither
And
can do
that's,
anything with each other because they're not compatible.
yeah. Which is something so interesting because people have been able to figure out how to properly, I guess, visualize and then convey this paradox. That is
Hmm.
what the backrooms are at the end of the day, I suppose. Yeah, it's a paradox of everything and nothing because it just exists and then you're there. The backrooms are a paradox of everything and nothing at the same time. And then when you enter it, then you're the paradox of it because you're a non-paradoxical creature
Yeah.
existing in this enormous space of paradox. It's like, wow. And it's the first paradox, I guess, that like I said already, yeah. I think it's the first paradox that we've been able to convey this uh, palatably.
Yeah,
But
I
I
think
guess
this
that's why it becomes
visually.
horror. Hmm?
I think this visually. I think just in general, paradoxes are something hard that to visualize, and
Yeah,
something that the Backrooms is able to do.
yeah,
You know, like you can describe a finite being inside an infinite being, but you know that's really hard to visualize. And then whenever you bring something to the Backrooms, that you realize that, oh, that's very different than how I would think of it. And I think that that's something that's able to visualize that just in a way that just saying it can't.
yeah. Which is interesting because then I wonder to myself if this opens up the door to more paradoxes being able to be properly visualized in such sense. I mean, we have stuff like infinite staircases and
Hmm.
Mobius strips, right? That we've
Yeah.
like visualized in a sense, but it's not something that it's something we've been able to visualize in a sense, but nothing of this magnitude. You know,
Yeah. I don't.
it's
I don't think. I don't think we've just been able to visualize the pure, um, not even unnatural, but unnatural. Like it's not even against nature; it's wholly removed in a way. That I
like
think
it's
that,
creating its own nature.
in a way, yeah, like it's completely separate from us. I think that that's something that we haven't really been able to visualize well until stuff like the Backrooms. That it's something that's completely removed from what we understand. And that's what I was saying earlier, that the Backrooms kind of feels like a human nature, a nature that exists entirely through what humans have made, in a way. So it
Yeah.
is removed from what we understand as nature.
Perhaps also the backrooms are meant to appear as something different, but it conforms enough to our perception so that we can perceive it.
That's
Maybe
true.
that's the part of the paradox that meets, maybe that's the part of the infinite that meets the finite in the sense, not necessarily the finite meeting the infinite, because it's
Hmm.
every level of the backrooms is visualized and seen and conveyed as something that resembles what we know, what
Yeah.
we can understand and put into a picture. Like even level 12 that is completely censored and any method of taking pictures or videos of it are impossible and any memories of it once you leave the level are almost impossible to recall. It's there is still a basic composition of it somehow some way
Hmm.
that is easy for us to digest. It might just be that the backrooms are conforming to our perception so that we understand in our human way what we've gotten ourselves into and where
Yeah.
exactly we are. This is sounding more and more philosophical and like divine than I initially let on, but I mean,
Yeah.
could be. I don't know.
I think in a way it's the thing that it's like, we'll take the dimensions. That, 3D can perceive 1D and 2D. But 2D cannot perceive 3D. So we can't see the level above us. So in a way, a finite being can only perceive the infinite being in a finite way. So we have to have some level of end to the Backrooms. So that's what you're going, like the perception, that's just the way that we can perceive it, because we just fundamentally cannot perceive something that is infinite. So you must
Yeah.
bring it down to basically a bunch of really big finite things, which
Yeah, like the
is,
office spaces in the original yellow image
yeah,
or the infinite cities or an infinite forest or yeah.
right,
But it's still infinite thing,
yeah,
meaning that it's still like infinite ocean. You're dropped in an infinite body of water. It's the infinite meeting the finite for our poor human brains.
yeah.
Yeah,
Do we want to start wrapping up then?
sure. Holy cow, that got metaphysical real quick.
Well, I think that's all we got for today. It's been really fun. Thank you guys all for watching. Thank you, Daniel, for being here. Thank you to myself for being here. And we will hopefully
Always.
see you guys all soon, as soon as we figure out the next thing to talk about.
Yeah.
Farewell.
Hopefully, maybe BuzzFeed Part 2. We don't know.
Hopefully.
Hopefully, I don't know. Comment if you want to see us or hear us talk about something. I don't know.
Yeah, give us suggestions. You do our job for us. Give us suggestions.
Yeah, help us out.
And
Right.
with that, farewell.
See ya.